Circle, and today we're looking at entering 30k, the part 2 I suppose this would be, and this time out we're looking at actually how you would construct a list. Now, there were a few different options I toyed with, but I decided in the end to go with the Legiones Astartes as the starting point, because they really are the crux of 30k, and despite the fact that there are Solar Auxilia, Knights, Mechanicum, Militia, even Demons to an extent in 30k, they aren't really what people think of straight away, right? And of course the first stop for most people when they enter this system is Space Marines, because they're cheap, they're easy to acquire, you can build a list fast with them. So we're going to start with the Space Marines. Now, two books I'm going to be using here are the Horus Heresy Book 5 Tempest and the Legiones Astartes Age of Darkness Army List. I've got these in PDF form so you can actually see them in the video, so I can actually describe what we're doing step by step. So, first things first. When we actually pick our force, in this case we're going to pick Ultramarines. Why? Because they're Matt Ward's poster children, and it gives me a good laugh. Now, once we've decided on our faction, it's going to be Legiones Astartes, Ultramarines. That's the specific sub-faction. We have to then pick the actual Force Org chart we're going with. Now, the only Force Org chart that you guaranteed get is the Crusade Force Organization chart. That's this one right here. Now you notice it's slightly different to the 40k one, because it has an additional HQ slot, an additional Elite slot, and even though it has the Fortification, Lords of War and Allied detachments, there's actually a restriction on the Lord of War themselves. That restriction, although not listed in this list, is part of the 30k core rules, and it's basically that the Lord of War cannot be used at all below 2,000 points, and that a Lord of War cannot take up more than 25% of your total points. So for example, in a bang on 2,000 point game, your Lord of War has to cost 500 points or less. Simple, right? Now, there are 3 other Force Org charts that you will see. You need your opponent's permission to use them, believe it or not. It's actually stated back up here. 3 alternate organisational charts that you can use in Age of Darkness, as well as special mission-specific design to incorporate them, blah blah blah. Strictly optional when not included as part of a particular mission, and should always be agreed upon by both sides before their use. Why is this? Because, like what's happened with 40k over the last few years, with Unbound and formation detachment bullcrap, these aren't exactly balanced, right? So, first of these is the Onslaught chart. Troops is less, but more heavy support options, multiple Lord of War options. Nothing too crazy. Castellan, which basically allows you to go Fortress heavy, real fluffy one for Iron Warriors and Imperial Fist players. And last but not least, Leviathan. And good luck finding a tournament that allows you to just use Leviathan. It's frowned upon. So, anyway, you've now picked your faction, and you've got your basic army list, right? You now have your allies chart. So in this allies chart, they don't sync up top and bottom, because some legions, maybe say Thousand Suns might really like someone else, but that legion doesn't actually like the Thousand Suns in return. So you'll notice that the Force Org chart can have some variations in 2 directions. Anyway, we're going with Ultramarines. So most of the way across theirs is fellow warriors. They do have some Swarm Brothers. In the Ultramarines case, it's the Imperial Fists, the Blood Angels, the Iron Hands, and the Imperial Army. Strangely enough, not the Salamanders. Salamanders have the most Swarm Brothers, because they're just nice guys all round, right? Anyway, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There you go. 9 legions love the Salamanders. So yeah, pretty swell guys. Anyway, if you want to use an allies detachment, that's what you've got to keep in mind. Next, we have our warlord traits. These obviously will only come into play when you actually start your game. I prefer to just use these over the 6th edition, 7th edition, whatever edition you're using at the time. Warlord traits, these are just simple, they're in the book, there to use, right? Now, we go into our actual characters. Before we purchase anyone, we have to keep in mind our legion rules. So, some legions, such as Raven Guard, have clauses like you can't have more vehicles than you have infantry models with the Legiones Astartes rule. So, how does this apply to our HQ? Well, the Praetor is the number one go-to for any list that people will pick in decent points levels. You can only have one Praetor per 1,000 points. Now when you go into the special rules, you're looking for this one here, Legiones Astartes. That means he gets all the rules of the Ultramarines. You'll notice that most vehicles, dreadnoughts, things like that will not have this special rule. The next special rule that he's got is Master of the Legion. Alright, that's important later. Now, when selecting war gear from this list, do remember that your Legion, will have alternate options. In this case, the war gear, the Mantles of Ultramar, then the Legatine Axe are both war gear options that you could give your Praetor or other independent characters. So, keep that in mind. A build that I've seen some people run is a Legatine Axe and Mantle of Ultramar and a Paragon Blade, this one here, on a Space Marine Praetor. Why? Because that's just brutal. Being a specialist weapon, the Paragon Blade doesn't confer the +1 attack. But the Legatine Axe is also a specialist weapon, so running the two together gives you some viable attacks at AP2 at initiative at additional strength, and any 6s to wound are instant death with this weapon. So you'll get your base attacks improved to 5, and if you include digital lasers, somewhere in this list, here they are, you'll add an additional +1 attack. So you're looking at 6 attacks base on a Praetor, let alone charging and getting another additional attack. So that's very, very dangerous, considering that you'll be finding weapon skill 6, equivalent strength of 5, and initiative of 5, and you'll be AP2. So that's the sort of build that a lot of people will go for when they're picking their Praetor. Now, ignoring all this war gear, we get to the Master of the Legion rule. Now here's the thing. They allow you to use a Rite of War. Now the Rites of War are many and varied. Mostly they're pretty fluffy. You'll find that your Legion Rites of War generally will suit you better than the generic Rites of War, but the generic Rites of War are available to everyone as long as their Legion rules allow it. As I said before, remember that the Legiones Astartes Raven Guard, an army I've played a lot, can't take more vehicles than they have models with that Raven Guard rule. So, they can't run a Rite of War that's tank heavy very easily, because it doesn't sync up with their Legion rules. The Legion rules will always supersede these basic rules. Now, there's a lot of limitations that come with Master of the Legion. You'll unlock things like command squads, things like that. Sometimes you can take Legion-specific troops as a command squad. In this case, I believe they can actually take Invictus Suzerain in place of a command squad. Yes, Invictus Suzerain can be chosen instead of a command squad for any Praetor of the Ultramarines Legion. So that's something else to keep in mind. These are additional rules that picking your Legion allows you to use. Now I have to quickly put a clause here. You don't have to use them, right? Just because you have additional Legion war gear or Legion units, it doesn't mean you have to include them in your force. Just because you selected Ultramarines, for example, doesn't mean you have to fill your army full of the Ultramarine specialist units. You can just say I'm running Ultramarines and run a very vanilla list, right? So keep that in mind. next HQ you have along the bat is the Centurion. Now, a big thing with the Centurion is, yeah, it's cheap at 50 points, but look what you're getting. You're getting a Marine, slightly better weapon skill, ballistic skill, initiative, bit better on the attacks, leadership, wounds. It's basically a super sergeant, right? Only got a 3+ save. You have to fork out on the war gear. You really do, if you're going to take a Centurion, and the points will grow rapidly if you do so. So you have to keep that in mind if you're picking this HQ type. Many people, however, will not pick the Centurion. Some legions have their own HQ options, such as the Wordbearers. They have the Diabolist, and the Alpha Legion have the Saboteur as another optional Centurion type. Because the big thing with Centurions is they have another special rule called Legion Consuls. What the Legion Consuls allow is they allow you to upgrade to a specific Legion support officer. So this is where all your specialist HQ types come in. You buy a stock Centurion, you then pay a flat points rate to upgrade them to another character type. Right? Could be a Master of Signal, for example, and that will cost you 45 points. Your war gear is now default changed to this. And despite gaining this war gear, you now are restricted from taking this war gear. But you can still upgrade everything else as per this list. And you obviously get the special rules of that consul type. Now, the big thing to remember with a lot of these consuls is many of them are what they call Legion Support Officer. A Legion Support Officer cannot be a compulsory HQ. So you cannot take 3 Librarians or 3 Masters of Signal, that kind of thing, as your compulsory HQ choice. These are a support officer. You will need to take another consul type, or a chaplain, or a centurion, or a praetor, something like that, to fill in the compulsory HQ slot. Now, thinking back to the Rights of War I mentioned earlier, the Master of the Legion rule on the praetor allows them to use a Right of War. Now, what the Rights of War do is they grant you something specific to your legion. In this case, we'll just quickly look at the Ultramarines' unique Right of War, the Logos Lectora. So what it means is you're adding rules to your army, but you're also having some limitations because of it. It's not just a flat gain. So when you take a Right of War, you have to keep this in mind. So the first thing it adds is Full March. Any unit affected may reroll run distances. Sure. Hold Fast. Any affected unit which remains stationary this turn may make snapshots at Ballistic Skill 2. May be handy. Retribution Strike. All affected units gain the counterattack special rule. Pretty good. Now remember, this is going to affect everyone that has that Legiones Astartes special rule. Right? It's not going to affect Dreadnoughts and that kind of thing. Now, the limitations. As I said, every Right of War has a limitation. In 30k, you don't just get free special rules. There's always something, right? Some kind of penalty that you pay. In this case, detachments using this Right of War must take an additional compulsory HQ choice. So again, that's going to restrict the types of consoles you have available. In this case, it actually allows you to take a Master of Signal Consul, which is normally a support officer, in the compulsory slot for that second slot, which is quite a boon. Some would say, some would not like it. I think it's quite a good consul option. Detachments using this Right of War must take an additional compulsory troops choice in addition to that usually required. So you now must take 3 compulsory troops in this army, right? Now, for some people, that's going to be frustrating, because the compulsory troops is limited to breaches or tactical marines. Now, some people will want to take recon marines or things like that. And assault marines are also a compulsory choice. But if you want to take recon marines or tactical support squads, for example, the all special weapons squads, they're a non-compulsory troops slot. So you now have to spend points on a unit you may not want before you can even get them in your list. The next thing is, detachments using this rite of war may not take more vehicles with either the tank or flyer type in total than they have infantry units in this detachment. Now, the key there is units. So a HQ is 1 unit, a command squad is 1 unit, a tactical squad is 1 unit. But keep in mind, if you take a Damocles command rhino, that's a tank. So that's actually going to count towards this total. Lastly, units which are part of this detachment using this rite of war may not deploy as infiltrators or enter play via deep strike. This means that certain units which may only enter play in this fashion, such as drop pods, may not be taken as part of the detachment. So, as I was saying before, things like jump troops, you may not want to take them. Drop pods, may not want to take them. So if you're building your list and you want to use this rite of war, you have to keep all this in mind when you build the list. And do bear with me, it may sound complicated at first, but it's really quite simple. Just keep in mind a couple of simple rules. First, pick your faction. Pick your race. Then pick your sub-faction. Then pick whether or not you're going to be using a rite of war. And if so, you now adhere to the rite of war and Legion special rules. If not, you just adhere to the Legion special rules. Pretty simple, right? So, that's that. Now, looking back into our army list. The Consuls, obviously, is your first thing you look at in your Centurion slot. Obviously, you have the Praetor, and some Consuls, such as Delegatus, actually allow you to take a rite of war. So that's something also to keep in mind. You're not locked into the Praetor if you want to take a rite of war, but you're still sort of locked into the Delegatus. So, remembering that you have all these HQ options available, command squad upgrades, things like that, the very next place I like to look is I like to go straight down, ignore all the awesome cool stuff in Elites, and there is a lot of cool stuff in Elites, especially your special units, and I go straight down to the troops. First troops choice I always like to look at is the Legion Tactical Squad. 125 points, 10 Marines, 12.5 points each, right? And includes a sergeant. Fantastic value. They have a special rule called Fury of the Legion, and basically, as long as they have 5 or more models still in the squad, and the unit has bolters or bolt pistols, they can fire twice for each shot they would normally have. So they can fire up to 4 shots when rapid firing. However, it can only be done if they haven't moved, and it requires them to not have disembarked a vehicle, that kind of thing, and it has to be done in the shooting phase, so unfortunately you can't overwatch with it. Now, Fury of the Legion attack is fantastic. If you can actually pull one off with a 20-man tactical squad, you're firing 80 bolt gun shots into the opposing unit, theoretically. So, pretty cool rule, right? And decent-sized tactical squads, enemies will make sure to stay away from them because of their fear of being Fury of the Legion. Downside, however, of a Legion Tactical Squad, notice the special weapons? None at all. Yes, you can put some upgrades on the Sergeant, which get pricey fast, but you're basically, every single guy is a stock Marine with a bolt gun. There is nothing here that can hurt Terminators, nothing here that will hurt HQs, no heavy weapons, no special weapons, nothing. So, you really are restricted to that bolt gun, and that Fury of the Legion rule is what makes this unit still somewhat decent. The other thing to keep in mind is they're a compulsory troops choice. And this is the thing that really hurts Legions as a whole. When playing smaller points battles, those first 2 tactical squads will be 250 points. Your Centurion, if you want a decent one, is going to cost you at least 100 points. If they're a Consul, you're probably looking around 100, 150 points. You're eating up heaps of points straight off the bat without adding any effective firepower or killing power to your force. You're eating up probably half of your points that are available to your list in a 1,000-point game. That remaining points, you've got to fit in stuff that can kill things like Terminators or tanks. And that's why taking a Rite of War, especially in lower points, may be disadvantageous to you, because like with the Ultramarines one listed here, taking 3 troops choices means that even if you're going for cheap Legion tactical squads, you're spending an extra 125 points you can't afford to spend. Moving on from the tactical squad, you have the assault squad. I don't see many of these out there, I'm afraid. Blood Angels players are using them in orbital assault Rite of War lists. I see some of. But generally, people just consider these to be overcosted for what they can actually achieve in battle. They don't have the sticking power of the Legions, and they cost a lot more. Sorry, of the Tactical Marines, and they cost a lot more points. Many Legions as well don't really have benefits for their assault squads from their special rules. So, yeah, not very common. But, you know, they are a troops choice here. In 40k, they're a fast attack choice for most armies. The last compulsory troops choice option is the Legion Breacher Squad. Now, these guys are expensive. They're slow, but they can take a Land Raider as a dedicated transport, and they have a special rule called Hardened Armour. And Hardened Armour counts as being Void Hardened. And it basically means that if they cop wounds from template weapons, let's say flamers, frag missiles, things like that, then they get to actually reroll failed armor saves against them, if they get an armor save. And they, however, sleeping advance and run moves are reduced by 1 inch, because the armor is a bit bulkier and a bit slower. And you've also got to remember that the squad has the shields, boarding shields. The boarding shields will give them an invul both in and out of combat. It's not a very good one, but, you know, it's something. And they will count as armed with defensive grenades, so people charging you won't get the bonuses of charging. Very handy against World Eaters, Space Wolves, units that have like counterattack or rampage, that kind of thing. So, the other thing to remember is, unlike a tactical squad, they can take special weapons, but it's going to get costly fast, and one of these weapons in particular is just terrible and should never be taken. Now, here's where we get to what we call the support squads. So, a support squad is a troops choice, but it can't fill your compulsory slots in. Now, with the tactical support squad, this is a squad that's the opposite of a tactical squad, believe it or not. Because instead of every guy being armed with bolt guns, every guy is armed with a special weapon. You want a squad which is all plasma guns, all melter guns, all Volkite calibers, all Volkite charges, all rotor cannons. You fill your boots, you can have it. Right? But they're going to cost you a lot of points. 5 guys, 100 points. So you're looking at 20 points for each for the first 5 guys, and then 15 points each for the additional models, up to a full squad of 10. They're only using a Rhino as a transport unless you have a Rite of War allowing them to do otherwise. And then you're going to pay for all their special weapons. You want 10 plasma guns, that's maybe another 150 points. So if you have 10 Legion Tactical Support Marines, for example, it'll be 100 points plus another 515s is 75, so it'll be 175 plus another 150 points on plasma guns. You'll be looking at 225, 325 points for a squad. Yeah, ouch. That said, can kill a Primark. So keep that in mind. Pretty brutal if done right. So awesome squad, and again, one of those things people like to take in the lower points, but very hard to fit in, especially with your points restrictions available, because this one squad costs more than 2 tactical squads of 10 Marines. Another support squad available to you is the Legion Reconnaissance Squad. So again, can't be used as a compulsory option, except in lists where it is allowed, again, due to Rite of War changes. All these guys are basically is if you took Marine Scouts from 40k and put power armor on them. You can downgrade them back to Scout armor and you'll gain 2 special rules if you do so. Infiltrate, move through cover. The other thing that they can do is they can take some decent specialist weapons on their sergeant, and you can actually attach one of the console options is actually a sniper himself called the Vigilator, which you can attach to these units. So, interesting option, and allowing a Storm Eagle gunship as a dedicated transport, always fun. Now, when it comes to building the rest of the list, the choices are practically endless. There are heaps and heaps of options out there. In 30k, Tech Marines are actually a squad of 1 to 3 as an elite's choice, 35 points a model. Obviously this is before giving them their upgrades. Same thing with Apothecaries, 1 to 3, and the way these units work is they're allowed to actually be attached to different squads. So you pay for up to, let's say, 3, and then you can put each of those 3 Apothecaries into squads. Or you could even put them all into one squad if you really, really, really want them to keep Feel No Pain. Do keep in mind, however, that they're restricted to what units they can join. So, for example, Apothecary with a jump pack may only join squads with the jump infantry rule. One on a bike only join squads with bike rule. It may restrict you somewhat. You also have a lot of things like Dreadnought options, things like that, Rapier weapons batteries. At the same time, you also have, if I can get the right book, you'll also have your Legion-specific units. So, you might want to take some Invictus Suzerain in the Leech choice. They're a fantastic, very powerful unit, with everyone's got Artificer armor, everyone's got those boarding shields. They're all armed with the Legatine Axe, which is a power axe that strikes at initiative, which is phenomenal, and any 6s to hit will automatically wound. Makes them an absolutely implacable unit. They also get plenty of special rules, and, a viable option. And I know pretty much every Ultramarines player does have a squad of them. You also have, say, in Ultramarines, for example, a Dreadnought special character. You can take a fast attack choice, the Locutor Storm Squad. There's also Fulmentarius Terminators. There are special character HQs, and these guys can be used instead of, for example, a Praetor. He has the Master of the Legion rule on Remus Ventanus. So, he is a viable option for you when you're building the list. Generally, most people won't play special characters in their lists. They will use the models, but they'll use them as counts as something else. Just between you and myself. And obviously they'll have their own special rules, and that being a special character. You may get special HQ options. Believe it or not, Damocles Command Rhino is available to everyone. And of course, each Legion will have a Primark. But the Primark, in this case the Spiritual Liege, is a Lord of War. So if you take a Primark, you won't be able to take something like a Fellblade or a Typhon Siege Tank or a Thunderhawk, unless you're taking a Rite of War that allows it, or if you're using an optional Force Orc chart. So do keep these things in mind. So this is obviously a part 1 of building a list. We're going to probably get some other people around, such as my mate Colin, Kat, maybe Tim, see who we can get, and they can describe how they build their lists, things like that. And obviously we'll go through and we'll look at, say, Imperialis Militia, and how to make a list of them. We'll also look at building Mechanicum armies, what people have done right with their lists, where people go wrong with their lists, and we'll do these as we go through this series over time. This series is a difficult one to do, because obviously we're talking about, in the case of Legiones Astartes, 100 different unit types, right? And we can't really go through those one by one. That's why the Is It Shit series exists. So, and the other thing to keep in mind is I don't want to be going too in-depth with this, because all these I've got to put into PDF form or download as PDFs onto my computer in order to show them to you and explain what we're doing. Because if I just show you a blank screen, you probably won't understand it, because it's just a mouthful of dribble, right? And another important point is if you are looking at doing this, the Legiones Astartes Crusade Army List is the red book available from Forge World that allows you to... it's this book right here that I'm looking at now, and it will have all the warlord traits, characters, and all the units available to the legions. Great books. The downside is that every time they release a new book with new units, this becomes outdated somewhat. And it only gets worse with time and worse with edition changes. And keep in mind that 8th edition is coming up, so may not be worth getting it straight away. If you're looking at apps to help you build army lists, I don't suggest Army Builder. It is actually fucking atrocious for Horus Heresy. It's a clusterfuck at the moment, and it seems like they're just putting no effort at all into doing it. And instead, what I would suggest is the Quartermaster app, which you can download on iOS and I think on Android. I'd have to double check though, so don't shoot the messenger if I'm wrong on that. But that's fantastic because it allows you to build your army list just by clicking on the units and selecting them with your finger and outkitting them as you want, and obviously picking your rights of war and all that kind of thing within there. Now, sometimes it will be wrong, so you can't just get Quartermaster and use it, because you need to know what you're doing when you use the app. So you need to know what combinations are and aren't allowed, and you need to sit there with the book as you make your lists, unless you've sort of swallowed it all up and have committed all this information to memory. And believe me, it comes fast. Legiones Astartes and how to build their army lists will come very naturally to you after you've made 4 or 5 lists. It's really that simple. So, just to cover off on again, remember, choose what army, so say Marines, Mechanicum, whatever, choose your sub-faction, choose whether or not you're going to use a Rite of War, and if you are, make sure that your Rite of War is allowed by your Legion traits, and the units you select are allowed by your Legion traits. And if you're not using a Rite of War, just make sure you follow your Legion rules. And it's that simple. Thanks all for watching the episode, guys. Any questions at all about anything, do give them to us in the comments or hit us up on Facebook. Thank you all, and I'll see you.